Hello, this is Valerie Moore from the Frederian Gazette. Thank you for joining us this rainy Wednesday evening as we reenact the controversial book Say I Slew Them Not, written by Kingsley Montefello, edited by Alexander Phillips, and narrated by Pepper Holloway. If you've enjoyed our program so far and want to support independent journalism, please donate to our Ko-Fi at www.ko-fi.com/the Frederian Gazette. Content warnings for this episode include torture, death, police brutality, and violence, caring for injuries caused by police brutality, hanging, racism, colonialism, use of fictional slurs, colonial violence, and assassination. This program has been sponsored by Ignatow's Violins. Ignatow set the standard for the perfect violin 300 years ago. His violins have been used by the best musicians in the world and is the only violin used by the Dardanian Royal Orchestra for over 200 years. By the best to be the best. We now pass the mic to Pepper Holloway, who will be reading
Opening statements read at Sebastian Wallace's trial for war crimes committed while he served in Kingsley's cabinet. September 27th, 1826. McGill's Tavern, Bearcaska, Heatha. True to his word, Siegfried planted a bomb meant to go off the minute Griffin's train pulled into Bearcaska station, but it failed to explode, and the bitch lived. Griffin's retribution was brutal and sudden, like the blade of a guillotine. She created her own special task force from officers she served with in Alcahun and police officers with the highest number of Icatel murdered in their custody. They were originally called the Temporary Disciplinary Police Force, TDPS, but we called them the DRCs. Dirty, rotten coppers for the copper-plated body armor they wore. Griffin proposed segregating the city, but before the Heathian government could enact her suggestion, the Indariums revolted in Alcahun. Only the Heathians were surprised. The Heathian government ignored Griffin's requests and funneled all their support and supplies into Alcahun as the revolution spread. Griffin, used to being left to her own devices, plunged into the Icatel and Indarium neighborhoods and implemented a reign of terror that would later be replicated by the real children of Heatha only a decade later. Random arrests, torture that no one bothered to cover up, mysterious disappearances, spontaneous fires that burnt a block or two before the fire brigade appeared only to haggle over the fees while the flames spread. We fought back the best we could while training the Icatel who flooded our ranks. Siegfried planted several bombs all over the city, forcing Griffin to constantly change the location of her headquarters while her men never truly felt safe, no matter where they slept. Despite our best efforts, we would not have stood a chance if Griffin hadn't shot herself in the foot and gone after the criminal underworld. She assumed, like Nautahun, we were helping each other, and if she could cut off our source of supplies and weapons, she hurt our efforts. Instead, she woke up the hornet's nest that was the smuggling trade. Soon, well-known criminals were begging us to give them a chance for personal revenge. We gladly agreed, and Griffin's most trusted officers started to disappear one by one, only to resurface in Mary's River days later. Or they were recalled by furious Heathian politicians, like the anything-but honorable Sebastian Wallace, who profited or partook in the smuggling trade. Despite throwing darts at a board that was too high for her reach, desperate to score the most minuscule of victories, Griffin still found a way to stab a deadly blow straight into the heart of the ILA. I sat in McGill's bar, nursing a beer and waiting for Devon to rejoin me. We had gone to the train station to bid my father and Katerina farewell. They were moving to Furdurn, the situation in Bearcaska becoming too dangerous. Devon was sad they were leaving, but I don't remember it being a tearful parting. Siegfried said goodbye with us, but left as soon as Heron arrived. On the way back, Devon spotted a boyfriend of his and promised to meet me at the tavern. Sandy, newspaper in his hands, found me first. He sat down without invitation and told me to read an old article. Archive Bombing, The Resurgence of the Icatel Liberation Army? By Quentin Jacoby. It seems like a scene from Draco's Tour of the Abyss. The air is dark, and my lungs are coated with dust as I painfully extract myself from the rubble. I cannot help but think, a few inches to the left, and I wouldn't be writing this article. I was one of the many reporters and excited spectators gathered around the steps of the archives in Bearcaska, Heatha, waiting for the Honorable Brian McPherson to award the Medal of Artistic Integrity to master painter and sculptor Cameron Whistlow. The ground rumbled and a tremendous roar and rush of hot air threw me to the ground, pieces of marble landing around me. I was merely stunned, but dozens were wounded, and a tragic number of reporters and Hevian officials were killed. The police have not yet released the full list of casualties, but confirmed Cameron Whistlow and the Honorable Brian McPherson, Archibald Tweese, Jacqueline Willis, and Mary Jackson died during the explosion. Details are sparse. The police only confirmed this was the work of the terrorist organization known as the Ikatel Liberation Army, the ILA. They have not yet revealed how it was done, but they claim they are close to catching the perpetrators. As I write this article, the Chamber of Dijon is meeting to issue a curfew for the Ikatel population, and the police claim they've made several arrests. The ILA disbanded in 1808 after the Shadow War, and it is too soon to determine if this is a resurgence of the old organization or a new branch inspired by the Ikatel Freedom Movement, IFM, in the Hevian Hills, formerly known as the Kilbraga. Unionist Chamber members Patrick McAllister and Sebastian Wallace have denounced these attacks as, quote, a barbaric ritual of bloodthirsty and backward beings. These attacks only serve as proof of the Ikatel's immaturity and inability to govern themselves. Plumet Chamber member Ian Crichton argues, this tragic attack is another symptom of the harmful occupation of the Hevian Hills. The Ikatel race are legally recognized as second-class citizens, which once gave them the right to trial by jury and freedom of movement. Yet we treat them worse than the Indarians. This is further proof that the aggressive unionist policy is harmful and is only exacerbating the growing situation. The Ikatel question, long thought settled after the Shadow War, has re-emerged as a polarizing issue fueled by the IFM's brutal attacks in the Hevian Hills. The IFM is an extremist movement destroyed several times before re-emerging in 1818 under the leadership of Marcus Galloway and Carrie McNair. They are the most wanted Ikatel in both the Hevian Hills and Hiva, but have frustrated all attempts to arrest them. Marcus is the problem, said Representative McAllister. He is an extremist and is driving other Ikatel to commit desperate violent acts. If we were to arrest him, the IFM would be leaderless and would crumble. The Plumet party, however, disagrees. Arresting Galloway or McNair is a temporary measure, not a solution, argued Honorable Shannon MacDonald. The solution is to review our relationship with the Ikatel and find common ground. The Unionists' aggressive policy is exacerbating the problem. The Ikatel question will be a deciding issue, not only in this year's chamber elections, but also in the 1829 presidential election. Depending on which coalition is formed following the election, either McAllister or MacDonald could be president, although Representative Sebastian Wallace is lobbying hard for the position. Prior to the archive bombing, polls found the average Hevian willing to review Hevian-Ikatel relations. Now, however, many are predicting the bombing has pushed many Hevians towards the Unionists and their harsher policies. President Ichabod Smith has yet to make an official statement regarding the archive bombing and Hiva's plans for the Ikatel. Since the Hevian electoral system is a presidential parliamentary system, this could mean the Unionists will win both the presidency and control of Dijon chambers. However, there is a fear that the Ikatel question could split the election results, with one party winning the presidency and the opposite party winning the chambers. That, however, would be preferable to one party winning the presidency, but none of the various parties winning control of the chambers. In that case, a coalition would have to be formed with former political opponents, an arrangement that has never lasted long in Hevian politics and could create 4 years of political gridlock. I was flummoxed by the word terrorist, but Sandy was more concerned about who wrote the article. It's the fraud, Jacoby, he said, pointing at the byline. I shrugged, and he explained Quentin had been asking other Ikatel about us. He was very eager to interview our leader. Think he's working with the Hevians? I don't know. He's desperately trying to find Siegfried. I pointed out that it could be beneficial to have the press by our side, and Sandy stopped. If he's not a squealer. Maybe we could interview him first. Feel him out, I said, taking a sip from my beer. I can do it. You stick out too much. If he's not trustworthy, he's going to be able to give the Hevians an accurate description of you, and they're going to know you. He cracked his tattooed fingers, and I swear the eyes on his fingers were glaring at me. I, on the other hand, look like any other Ikatel, I continued with a shrug. They can't tell us apart anyway. He said he would assign the task to Frank's people before furrowing his eye ridges and asking, "What the hell is wrong with Tossier?" Devin tumbled from table to table until he spotted us. "What's wrong?" growled Sandy. Devin grabbed onto his shoulder for support and bent over, gasping for air. "Breathe, Dev, breathe," I said. God damn it. "Out with it," snapped Sandy, drawing a few looks towards us. Devin tightened his grip on his shoulder and wheezed, "It's easier." Sandy knocked his glass to the floor as he leapt from his chair, grabbed Devin by the cuff of his shirt, and pinned him to a support beam. "What about her?" I placed my hand on Sandy's arm and said, "You need to calm down." He turned on me, his sinister glare a fearful grimace, and I jerked my head at the other Ikatel watching. Sandy grudgingly released Devin. "What happened?" "She's alive," he instantly added as Sandy snapped his toothpick in half. "Ernest and Gary found her in the alleyway. Gary went to find Heron, Ernest brought her to your place, and I was sent to find you." "Who did it?" Sandy said, his voice quiet, and his words vibrated like agitated glass. "It was Griffin's assholes." I stepped in front of Sandy. "Sandy, you can't go after them. Not alone," I said. "Let's call the others. Let's plan." I grunted as he shoved me into the pillar and marched out. I was about to chase after him when Devin grabbed my arm and asked if I wanted to die. After a brief argument, we decided to go to his apartment and warn the others. We left money for the beers before stepping outside into a bitter gust of wind. It was late September, the last warmth of summer stripped from the land. Bearcaska nightlife pushed us to and fro as we kept our gazes down. Laughing and drunk Hevians bumped into us while the dancing shadows produced by the southern lights haunted our every step. Music and hilarity from the vaudeville shows blasted from open doors, knocking us off course. In the midst of that frivolous whirlwind, I felt the presence of the inescapable and watchful eyes of Hevian injustice, their hungry hounds of the law hanging onto our shadows as we disappeared into the dark and filthy alleyways, desperate to shake our invisible foe. When we finally reached Sandy's apartment, we did not use the front door as we were afraid of being noticed by his neighbors. Instead, I played with the lock on the gate and entered his backyard. Gary greeted me by shoving a revolver in my face. "Mel, Kingsley, and Dev," he said, lowering his weapon. "You gave me one hell of a scare." "We're sorry," I said as we walked in, and he holstered his revolver. "We didn't want to risk coming in through the front door. How is she?" "We don't know yet," he said, leading us through the narrow kitchen and into the cramped living room, Sandy's other tenants standing around curiously. "Where the hell is Sandy?" "On the warpath," I said. "What? You let him go after the Hevians alone? Do you think we could have stopped him?" snapped Dev. "Come on, you cowards, we have to find him." After a futile search brought us to the point of breaking curfew, we returned to the apartment, Gary collapsing onto the couch, and Devin disappearing into the kitchen to make something to settle his nerves. I walked up the creaky stairs and down the dark hallway, ignoring Sandy's curious flatmates. His room was predictably Spartan, except for Asia's wardrobe of various dresses, some of such high quality I assume Sandy stole them for her. Sandy's mattress lay on the floor, Asia's small bed crammed into the corner, and a lone table with a single candle stood in the middle of the room. My heart broke as my eyes landed on poor, bandaged Asia in her bed. She was a lily in full bloom that had been trampled upon. Bloody linen wrapped her jaw shut, a wet cloth gently laid over her bruised and swollen eye, her right arm rested in the sling, and even though she was no longer bleeding, her blood stained the sheets. My poor sister, for that was what she was, a sister we all failed. A trembling and sobbing Ernest sat by her side, bent over her hand as he held his ear chest. Heron, pouring himself a glass of water, motioned me over. "How is she?" I asked. "She'll be all right. She needs rest," Heron said, gulping down his water. "Where's Sandy?" "We don't know," I reluctantly admitted. "We looked all over for him, but it's curfew now. God damn it!" "Sandy's smart. He'll be all right," I said more to myself than to him. "They attacked his daughter, Kingsley. He's gonna be a wild animal." I glanced at Ernest. "How's Z taking it?" "Z's a mess." "Give me a few minutes, Uzir?" "Don't upset Zir further," he said before walking out of the room. Asia mumbled in her sleep, and Ernest's head jumped up. "It's okay. I'm here." I walked towards the suffering Ikatel and placed a hand on Zir's shaking shoulder. Z flinched and looked at me with Zir red and teary eyes. "I'm sorry, Ernest." I couldn't look at Asia, wanting to remember her flirtatious smile and defiant stance, not this broken and pitiful thing the Hevians left us. "Has she said anything?" "No." Sometimes she mumbles, but I can never make it out, said Ernest, his voice breaking. You should have seen her, Kingsley, when we found her. I hardly knew her. Heron will take good care of her. I should have been there. Z broke into a sob and rested Zir's head against her hand. I tightened my grip on Zir's shoulder as tears rippled down Zir's body. We'll avenge her, Ernest. I promise. I need to be alone, Kingsley. Please. The door opened, and I recoiled as a blood-drenched Sandy stumbled into the room. He staggered past me and collapsed onto the foot of Asia's bed, Ernest barely glancing at him. October 17, 1826, Goldfield Avenue, Bearcaska, Gila. Ernest, Siegfried, and I sat at a cafe, barely touching our coffee as we waited for Griffin's carriage. At first, I tried to keep a conversation going, but it always died because they were focused on the attack. It was Sandy's idea to avenge Asia by targeting Griffin personally, and Ernest, finally finding a cause worthy of his devotion, volunteered to be the one who killed her. I drew my jacket tighter around me as a bitter wind brushed against our scales. Heavy and gray clouds crawled across the dull sky held up by barren cherry trees, promising snow. Hevians, bundled in thick coats and furs with shopping bags hanging from their arms, laughed down the mosaic streets. Other Hevians languidly strolled by, whistling as their counterparts passed by, and watching them walk away in disgust. They were most likely heading towards Monet Square to watch Cicero's hot air balloon float by, despite the approaching storm. Ernest flinched as squealing children ran past us, their caretakers calling after them. "Where is he?" Siegfried muttered in a collie, turning his scone into a pillow of fluffy insides. "Maybe he's not visiting today," replied Ernest, still stirring Zir coffee. "We still have a few minutes. He was probably delayed by chasing Dev away," I whispered, trying to ignore the revolver hanging underneath my arm. Although I hated admitting it, I was nervous about Devon. We should have trusted someone more capable of planting the bomb on the carriage if anything went wrong. I swear, if he's arrested, Dev will be fine, I said sharper than I meant to. Our breaths caught in our throats as Griffin's carriage slowly rolled down the cobblestone street. A Minotaur sat in the driver's seat, occasionally encouraging his two majestic white horses. Past heroics by Hevian's police officers, mostly Ikatel and Minotaurs being quote-unquote brought to justice, covered the carriage's wooden panels. The carriage crawled past us, and we feared Devon had failed to plant the bomb or Gary had improperly set the timer. Bombs were poor Asia's forte. "What now?" I whispered. "Wait," breathed Siegfried. The world around me blurred as the carriage creaked forward, all sights, sounds, and smells meaning nothing to me. Even my own heart seemed to stop beating as the world waited. A blast of splintered wood and brilliant red, and the world crash-landed on my shoulders. Screams of fear and panic, and the shattering of dishes, smoke and burnt flesh, chairs and the table knocked over, Siegfried and Ernest already charging towards the burning, molten mess that had been the carriage. I followed. Hevian cries for help and shrill infernal screaming whirled around me. I ran around the blood-stained cobblestones and the broken splatter of the Minotaur to the pulsing remains of the horses. Their intestines hung out of their shredded stomachs like streamers from a popper, and their burnt hair and flesh coated my nostrils. One of the horses died instantly, but the other screamed, kicking and jerking its legs like a dying spider. I raised my revolver and fired. Blood running down the horse's forehead. White flakes landed on its matted hair, and I looked at the sky. Snow. The carriage door burst open, and a bloody hand reached towards the sky. Ernest jumped onto the burning carriage and stood over the doorway, Zir's revolver steadily pointed at the survivor. Snowflakes swirled around Zir, melting in the still warm blood. Gone was the fear that had engulfed Ernest in the sewers. Gone was the twisted need to value Hevian lives over our own, to value civility over justified rage, to fear instead of embrace our people's might. This was the only way to ensure justice for Asia. The police and soldiers would deny they were involved at all if pressed, and there wasn't a single lawyer in Hiva who would take our case. We were expected to be grateful they didn't beat Asia to death and remain silent. If it had been anyone else, Ernest might have been content to keep his peace, but not Asia. For some, the cause itself was enough. For others, it needed to be attached to something tangible, something they loved beyond all else. Ernest pulled the trigger, and in that moment, Z was free. Siegfried and I flanked the carriage, looking for the predictable reinforcements, leaving footsteps in the barely visible snow. Gunshots echoed behind us, soon replaced by the clicks of an empty chamber. "Ernest!" I called after the sixth shot, Z unable to hear me or acknowledge the world around Zir. "Here they come!" Siegfried shouted, firing 2 shots at swarming cops before running behind the burning carriage. I called to our friend while foolishly trying to dodge bullets until Siegfried eventually pulled me into hiding. Ernest stood on the burning heap of wood and blood, snowflakes kissing Zir's scales until a bullet burrowed into the remains an inch from Zir's foot. Blinking as if a spell had been broken, Z jumped down next to Siegfried. We fired a volley at the approaching Hevians, but we weren't armed for a prolonged engagement. Siegfried called for our remaining ammunition before ordering, "Ernest, you go first, down that back alley behind us. Then Kingsley, go right. I'll hold him off as long as possible." "You can't!" I snapped, flinching as a bullet clipped the carriage. "Don't argue!" Ernest and I shared glances and growls before running through the accumulating snow, Siegfried's gunshots cracking through the air behind us. You've just heard opening statements read at Sebastian Wallace's trial for war crimes committed while he served on Kingsley's cabinet from Say I Slew Them Not by Kingsley Montevello. Tonight's episode was read by Pepper Holloway and was sponsored by Ignatov's Violin. To be the best, one needs the best. Be sure to follow us on Instagram and Blue Sky at Verdarian Gazette. Join us next Wednesday at 5 p.m. for episode 10, Abolitionists Margaret Leland and Senator Devin Tossier refused to testify in Kingsley's trial.